Thank you very much, Cindy, for the kind introduction. I was really honored to be asked to speak and to talk especially about my dear mother, Jean Hennessey. Thank you, Hanover Historical Society. Thank you, Bob Keene and Cindy Bettinger, who have made this evening possible. And also thank you to Grace Hope Hill for her inspirational story. I already feel as if I need to sign up for more exercises. She was a woman ahead of her time, just as is my delightful mother. Rather quickly after ending the phone call with Cindy, I sat down and said to myself, what in the world was I thinking? How can I possibly do my mother's life justice in a 20-minute presentation and such a short time to prepare? As I began to put this program together, my emotions have run the gamut. I started by feeling terror. How well do I actually know Jean Hennessey as anyone other than my mother and the remarkable grandmother that she has been to my children? I felt panic. The timeline is daunting. I could spend a year going through just the material that I have at home, never mind the files at Dartmouth's Rauner Library. How do I do this in 20 minutes? I had moments of hilarity. My mother was so much more than her extensive resumes. She was, in fact, a force of nature, a brilliant thinker, a woman way ahead of her time, an egalitarian, lighthearted woman who loved people and had a bold, hearty laugh. But she could also bring anyone to their knees in a second if she deemed it necessary and appropriate. My mother, Jean, was always completely over-obligated, a tireless, sleep-deprived, hard-working, philanthropic woman who took everyone under her vast wingspan. And I also, of course, felt some grief. I've missed her for 17 years. And there is almost no one left to talk with about her who knew my mother in the early years. There are a few on this Zoom call, however. Going through just some of our literally thousands of files, I had to stop more than once to process the memories and wipe a few tears. Most memories were heartwarming, but some brought back the grief of her untimely death at 77, with so much left to do. And so, just like my mother, I agreed to take on a task that was far beyond me in time, scope, and emotional intensity. In truth, it should be a book, and even then I would have trouble fitting it all in. If I ever took on a longer writing project about Jean Hennessey, perhaps I could write it in the style of her beloved Agatha Christie. She had every one of her mysteries and reread them over and over whenever she found time to relax. She told me, if you wait long enough between readings, you forget how they end, and each time is a brand new adventure. Every day was a brand new adventure for my mother. Every day she worked to improve our world. Quite a tough act to follow, or to report on tonight. At the end of the day, as we sat around the dinner table, my mother very often asked, "So, how did you improve upon each shining moment today?" No pressure, just an inquiry from the heart, and her laugh were the size of the universe. My mother grew up in Seattle, Washington, rode a horse to school on occasion, was the star of the high school debate team, which is no surprise to most of us, tap danced, and upon graduating, boarded a train for her solo trip to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. There, she majored in political science. In her second year, Jean became friends with a freshman in her dorm, Nancy Hennessey. Nancy's older brother, John Hennessey, a junior at Princeton University, had recently returned from World War II and came to visit his sister wearing his army dress uniform. accompanied by 3 or 4 Vassar women, they walked across the beautiful campus, and John, always the jokester and gentleman, offered the young women cigars before lighting his own. My mother was the only one to call his bluff by taking the cigar and lighting it. It was love at first prank. And despite the dean's objections to that John Hennessey was not stable enough for my mother, they married in 1948 in Vassar's Shakespeare Garden. They then moved to Cambridge, where my father attended Harvard Business School and my mother taught dance in a nursery school nearby. In 1950, they returned to my mother's beloved Seattle, where my father completed a PhD and the happy newlyweds had their 2 children, Johnny and Martha. When my brother was almost 5 and I was 3, our family moved across the country to Hanover, New Hampshire. In fact, to Webster Terrace, where I now live, and where my father had accepted a tenured professorship at Dartmouth's Amos Tuck School of Business Administration. My mother was not one to sit still. She signed me up for nursery school and set about meeting neighbors and faculty wives. She invited a group of friends to join a weekly meeting with the ground rules that no one should have to do any preparation, including no cleaning of houses and no making of food. They met outside when the weather allowed. And in each other's homes in the colder months, each woman brought her own bag lunch. The group was dubbed the Paper Bag Club, or PBC. They met most weeks, even after my mother's death. These are pictures of the Paper Bag Club having a picnic on Balch Hill. On the left, 1958, and then in 1963 on the right. I've written the names of those that I could identify below the 1958 picture, including Dorothy Campion, Carolyn Tenney, Betty Hunter, Carolyn Gramlich, Mary Maslin, and my mother sitting in the forefront. I hope some of you maybe can even give me some other names of some of these characters. I'd like to thank Adair Mulligan, by the way, from Hanover Conservancy for these pictures. This group of motivated, educated, youngish women supported each other and talked about the issues of family, town, region, state, and country. From Adair, I learned that the Conservancy is celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. And she told me that it was 60 years ago on March 14th, 1961, that my mother, Carolyn Tenney, Bob Norman, Ted Hunter, and George Wrightson got together after they attended town meeting. Their goal was to decide what to do about the fact that Hanover had adopted its first town-wide zoning ordinance without the consultant's recommendation to include a nature preserve zone and the famous green belt around downtown Hanover. And I believe perhaps now they call it the Green Necklace. The group of 5 worked together to bring the green belt to a successful vote the next year, and then incorporated as the Hanover Conservation Council in 1963. My mother served on their board from 1964 to 1969. Adair wrote, "The Green Necklace is now largely in place, thanks to their efforts, especially now with the Mink Brook Community Forest." In those early days, late 50s and into the 60s, my mother became a member of the Hanover Planning Board, president of the local League of Women Voters, and president of the New Hampshire-Vermont Economic Development Council. Her leadership in developing the Green Belt around Hanover and other environmental initiatives led to Jean's appointment by New Hampshire Governor John King to chair the Governor's Commission on Natural Beauty. About that time, she was invited to the White House by Lady Bird Johnson to represent New Hampshire at the Conference on Natural Beauty. I remember what an exciting event it was for her. And I even took that picture all the way on the left of my screen of her in the new dress she bought for her first trip to the White House. In the 1960s, my brother and I were told that the Connecticut River was so badly polluted, if anyone fell in, a tetanus shot would surely be required. Jean was instrumental in cleaning the river during her time on the governor's commission, and also established the Highway Beautification Act, protecting Franconia Notch, among other environmental feats. I wish I had time to do more research in this area, because I just began to find things which actually are on microfiche. Some of the younger people on this may not even know what that is. But here is a picture of Jean with Governor John King and with my mother's very dear friend, Mary Louise Hancock, during this time. And to the right is a picture of my mother working in Washington after testifying on some of the New Hampshire environmental issues. All of you know the Connecticut River is now suitable for swimming, and Franconia Notch has been protected in all its splendor. In 1968, Jean became the first executive director of the New Hampshire Charitable Fund and affiliated trusts, from which she retired in 1977. This means she commuted from Hanover to Concord all year round, 7 days a week for 9 years. And this was before Interstate 89 was a consistently 4-lane highway. She used the time to dictate letters into a machine in the front passenger seat. And in fact, she picked up hitchhikers frequently. And sometimes I'd run into people years later who would say, Hennessey, is your mother the one who dictates all day long as she travels from Hanover to Concord and back? During her 9 years at the Charitable Fund, its assets grew from $600,000 to $5 million. During this same time, the fund gave away over $1 million a year to charitable causes. Under Jean's leadership, the Charitable Fund started 50 daycare centers, numerous visiting nursing associations, and many programs for special needs children. In her time as executive director, the fund began the New Hampshire Commission on the Arts, the New Hampshire Historic Preservation Society, and the New Hampshire Recreation Program. Many United Way agencies were originally underwritten by the fund, and many others. As Jean traveled to Washington, where there were meetings of the National Council on Foundations, she began to realize that very little money was spent on the efforts to encourage women's involvement in philanthropic causes. So my mother started a women's caucus and set up a network of women and philanthropy groups in major cities across the country. She raised enough money from foundations to establish a staffed office in New York to carry on the job of assisting women in applying for grants. After she had been with the New Hampshire Charitable Fund for several years, she realized that donating money to various causes wasn't enough. What these organizations needed after the original seed money was good management. So she founded the Institute for the Management of Nonprofit Organizations, which the latest I could find was in 1985, had provided training courses to the staffs of over 200 nonprofit organizations. In the interest of time, I am showing a 2-page visual review of some of the other ways in which Jean Hennessey contributed in New Hampshire and beyond. If you're interested, now is the time to take a brief break from my voice and read this on your own, or I will give a brief overview of them. From 1977 to 78, she was the president. This is after leaving the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. She was the president of Women and Foundations Corporate Philanthropy. In 1978 to 79, she was the director of the New Hampshire Council, and my screen is not showing the rest of it, so you can read it. I'm sorry, I need to go back. She was commissioner, then appointed by President Carter onto the International Joint Commission, representing the United States. This was an organization that looked at environmental issues having to do with water along the border, so that when there was, say, a plant of some kind on the water in the US that was affecting the water that was also in Canada. In 1982 to 95, she was a research fellow in the environmental studies faculty at Dartmouth. And 1986 to 93, she was the director of the Institute on Canada and the United States, also at Dartmouth. In 1994, she was appointed then by President Clinton to the NAFTA Commission. And then in 1994 to 98, she was a board member also appointed by Bill Clinton to the Woodrow Wilson International Program. 1993 to 1999, she was a senior fellow again at the Institute on International Environmental Affairs. She also spent 20 years as a trustee and chair of the Finance Committee of the Population Research Center. She was the author of a New Hampshire Power Plant Siting Act and board member of all the organizations that are listed, which include the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Foundation, the Environmental Law Institute, the Canadian Studies in the United States, the Center for Northern Studies, Planned Parenthood, and she helped to found a Montessori school in Hanover, and even was on the New Hampshire Rhodes Scholar Selection Committee. She also, by the way, received 2 honorary degrees, one from Notre Dame and one from UNH, when my father also received an honorary degree at the same ceremony. Jean's mother, whom we called Baba, who was Adelia Lande, flew all the way from Seattle to be at the UNH ceremony. Once the honorary doctorate in humane letters was safely in my mother's hands, my grandmother said to her, "Well, I have only received 2 letters from you in my life, but they were both humane." I'm guessing that most people who are listening tonight knew of my mother as a political aficionado. She was certainly a strong, vocal, hardworking Democrat. Before, there were many of them, as Sandra just mentioned before the program began. In the media, she was called the doyenne, or the grande dame of New Hampshire politics, along with her dear friend, Mary Louise Hancock. Jean used her fundraising skills to help elect several New Hampshire governors after convincing them to run, including Hugh Gallen, Jean Shaheen, and John Lynch. She was at every rally, every Democratic rally, every celebration, at every parade, and received nearly every New Hampshire political accolade. She was a feminist before the word existed, as was my father. As far as I know, she only ran for one office, and that was for executive council, and she did not win. Being from the North Country and a Democrat made that very difficult, but I never heard her speak of running again. Truth is, my mother loved to win. She did serve on the New Hampshire and National Democratic committees. This is one of my favorite pieces from the Valley News about my mother. I think it captures her better than most any other. I'll let you read it. 1967. I love this quote because it truly and unapologetically describes my mother up until her last days. And also because I can attest to the fact that the world of politics is still in New Hampshire in the 19th century, having recently served 6 years in the legislature. I know that I've inundated you with my mother's many endeavors. I assumed that my mother was like all the others. Of course, to me, she was just my mother. And suddenly I started to realize she was fundamentally different than many others. I assume, for example, that all mothers and fathers in that era shared household duties. My father made dinner almost as often as my mother did, and he always made our lunches. I assumed that every mother talked at the dinner table about women's rights and the right to reproductive choices. I thought that all families considered their house cleaners, if they had them, as that they treated them the way they treated their friends and family. Every person who entered our house was treated with equal dignity. Jean had a way of seeing the potential in all people. She always believed in having dreams and pursuing them, not just for herself, but especially for those who were less fortunate or whose dreams had been shattered somewhere along the way. In fact, my mother couldn't keep her secretaries or assistants, as she would soon find a way to make it possible for them to get a college degree, or in one case, to start the Montessori school that she'd always wanted to run. She grandparented the same way she did everything else, with great gusto and creativity. Many times my mother expressed her conviction that it was up to her to show her grandchildren what women could be and what women could do. By the way, my children called my mother Madge, spelled M-A-J, because it was short for Her Majesty. Madge and my father took my children all across the USA by car, boat, and plane. Every moment was a learning experience. For example, she read Tom Sawyer to the children, timing their arrival into Hannibal, Missouri, to be in concert with the text. They also invited us to their house swap in the Cotswolds one summer in England. And my mother planned our adventures in England as a history lesson in chronological order, starting before Stonehenge and coming into the present time. She made treasure maps in museums, making it fun and memorable for the kids to find and learn about art. And when they traveled without the grandchildren, my mother painted postcards of all the places they went and sent them to the children. Thank you for your attention to all this information and for indulging my exuberance in talking about the great Jean Lande Hennessey. I wish I could have included more, to be honest, because there are so many other files waiting for me to sort. I'd like to end this evening by sharing the words of gratitude I wrote to my mother and read at the end of her memorial service in 2004. Thank you for giving us courage. The courage to do the right thing, even when it's the hardest thing to do. The courage to celebrate what is good and the courage to question what is wrong. The courage to grieve what we have lost and the courage to remember what we keep inside of us. May her legacy live on. And again, thank you to the Hanover Historical Society for the excellent programs that you have brought to us all and for this unusual opportunity to be a participant. And now that I've spoken, perhaps I'll get some sleep. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Martha, I'm kind of crying a bit. I'm sorry. It was just so moving what you had to say about your mother, and the things she said were so uplifting for Women's History Month. It couldn't have been more appropriate. So thank you. Thank you. We have a few comments in the chat, mainly just thanking everybody. That seems to be it. Let's see. Incredible snapshot of a different time, great talk, wonderful presentation. It is being recorded. Several people said, is it being recorded? And that seems to be the way it is. Do other people have questions that I didn't get to? Because everyone was mainly just thanking you. I think that's the main point right now.
Yes.
So I do think if you could put this together in some kind of article, Martha, but is that asking too much? I mean, you really did pull so many pictures and so many thoughts together in such a short time. It was amazing to me anyhow.
Well, that shows you how much there is. I, there's so much I couldn't include. I'd be happy to try to put it, you may not get it tomorrow, but I'd be happy to try to put it together into something local.
I think it would be very, very nice. I've talked to other people too. I think it would be just fabulous because it is quite a substantial history, and we all appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
I don't hear a lot of other questions, so I will wrap it up because we promised to not go over time, and you really did compress so many years. And I think having your slides helped it go even more quickly because pictures said so much. The board of the Hanover Historical Society wants to thank all of you for this wonderful program. So I wanted to thank all of you who listened to our presentations, and you, the viewer, are so important. If you have suggestions for future series, please contact me at bittingercynthia1@gmail.com, and I will get that out to the rest of the board members. Members of the organization will receive information as we go forward in this series. We do have a thought that we might be touring a very important building at the end of the year. And as soon as we hear about Webster Cottage opening, we'll let you know. The reason why it's closed now is, of course, the pandemic. So we have to have the little cottage closed. And also, if we are opening again, we will ask those of you out there to help us with tours. Want a tour of Webster Cottage? You can go to our website. A wonderful college girl, woman, did the whole tour of Webster Cottage, and you can see that on the website. So I want to thank Bob Keene, I want to thank Grace Hill, and I want to thank Martha Hennessey for these wonderful presentations. And please send in more comments if you wish. Basically, all of the chat was, you're all terrific. Thank you.